I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde. Mr. Clyde.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney and Ranking Member Comer for holding this hearing today so we can highlight the need for additional school security to protect our children. I join the nation in mourning for the 19 children and 2 adults who senselessly lost their lives due to an evil act committed about 2 weeks ago. While every loss of life is a tragedy, no one should weaponize or politicize the abhorrent acts to punish law-abiding citizens. For almost 250 years since the founding of our nation, countless hundreds of thousands of men and women have sacrificed their lives to provide the freedoms we enjoy today. Indeed, those freedoms were bought at a very high price and must be guarded continuously so they can be passed on to future generations. If we allow emotion to drive our actions, actions that have constitution-altering consequences, we will destroy the very foundation of our country and break faith with those who gave everything that we would be free. Evil deeds do not transcend constitutional rights. It's the other way around. Constitutional rights are the ones that transcend evil deeds. What occurred in Uvalde and other communities like Sandy Hook and Parkland was nothing short of heartbreaking tragedies and evil deeds. Heartbreaking and evil for the loss of innocent life, but also because, from what I have seen in the news about Uvalde, I believe it was mostly preventable. We don't know all the facts yet because the investigation is still ongoing, but I hope that this hearing is truly looking for legitimate, functional, and effective answers, and not just a bunch of left-wing talking points to fill the do something, do anything mentality that I have heard coming from the Biden administration. The White House press secretary, Ms. Jean-Pierre, said on Tuesday, May 31st, that President Biden is uninterested in pursuing tighter security at schools in the aftermath of the Uvalde tragedy. And I quote, "I know there's been conversation about hardening schools. That is not something that he believes in," said Ms. Jean-Pierre. One of the things I've learned during my 3 overseas tours of military combat was that the harder the target you are, the less likely you will be engaged by the enemy. That's a proven fact and just common sense that applies across multiple aspects of life. For that to not be a part of the administration's focus just shows how seriously out of touch the Democrat leadership is with reality. You know, I want to echo Mrs. Hughes' remarks from the previous panel. Schools should be hard targets. Violent criminals should never, ever have been able to gain access to the inside of these schools. That means schools across the nation should implement sensible security measures, like keeping doors locked, a single point of entry, better security technology, and a volunteer force of well-trained and armed staff in addition to a school resource officer. And where a school staff person has additional responsibility, they should receive additional compensation. A retired military officer from my district, an Army colonel, sent me an email a few days ago, and I want to read a short section of it, and I quote, "I'm absolutely convinced that the single most effective method to eliminate school shootings is to take away all the signs that declare all schools are gun-free zones and do away with all laws that require such postings. Replace those signs with signs using these words or similar words. We love our children and will do anything to protect them. Accordingly, selected teachers and staff are armed and trained to protect our children. Proceed at your own peril. You will be stopped." The rationale for this dramatic change in policy is really quite simple. Gun-free zone signs don't protect anyone. They take away the law-abiding citizen's capability to be a force in helping to protect the children, and they protect the would-be shooter because they believe they will be unopposed. From June 1950 through June 2019, 94% of mass shootings occurred in gun-free zones. If a would-be school shooter doesn't know who is armed and who is not, they would likely move to a more vulnerable target. Most potential school shooters are cowards at heart. They do not want to face a challenge to what they're trying to do. They want to be in control with no opposition. They do not like to be confronted by someone who would face off against them because that confrontation would preclude a school shooter wannabe from being able to take any unopposed action. To those who say that teachers or staff will likely not take up arms to protect their students, I say they will. There have been too many documented cases where teachers have heroically given their lives to protect their students. It's time to give them the tools and help them to better protect those children so they have a fighting chance to survive an encounter with someone who is bent on harming them. And for the record, if someone is intent on harming someone else, they will use whatever is available to do the job, be it a hammer, a knife, or whatever. There's a lot of insight in the words of this Army colonel. He also knows the difference between a hard target and a soft, easy target, and he knows the advantage of that difference. Ms. Ware, you were involved in Heritage Foundation's School Safety Initiative, which was developed after the 2018 Parkland shooting, correct?
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, what do you believe should be done to secure our schools from violent criminals to ensure that our students have a safe place to learn?
Well, I think there are, as I mentioned in my testimony and then again in my written submission, there are several avenues that can be taken, including physical security improvements. Again, it has become popular to mock people for talking about doors and those sorts of things, but these are basic security components of the rest of our everyday lives. We see them in apartment complexes. We see them in the building we walked into today. We see them in most corporate buildings that we walk into in any given day. In terms of having a quicker armed response, I think schools should have the flexibility to decide how that happens. If you look in my written submission, in a footnote, there are, just from the last couple of years, a good number of examples, and it's just a smattering of them because I didn't want the footnote to be 12 pages, of armed responses saving lives, whether from school resource officers or from, including in one case, from an armed staff member who stopped a kidnapping and then prevented an armed individual from entering the school where other children were. And I think, again, a key component of this is not just looking at physical security, but also, as plenty of witnesses have mentioned, having the adequate mental health resources. We're not talking about blaming mental illness, but we are talking about, when you look at, one, what it means for human
The
flourishing.
gentleman's time has expired. And,
I would end by saying, looking at licensed mental health professionals in schools.
Thank you very much. I yield back.